I will never forget the moment my father looked me in the eye 2 weeks after I buried my 5-year-old son and said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. We were standing in his corner office, sunlight pouring through the massive windows behind his walnut desk, and he did not flinch when he told me, "Your son's death is why you're getting demoted, Johnny. You're distracted. The company needs focus." I stood there, frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. This was the man I had sacrificed my entire youth, for the man whose approval I had chased for 10 years, pouring every ounce of my energy into building his empire. And now in my darkest moment he saw me as nothing more than a liability. Before I tell you how I walked away from everything I built and created something even bigger, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever felt unappreciated by someone you sacrificed everything for. And subscribe, because what happened next changed my entire life. Let me take you back to where it all started, back when I still believed family meant loyalty. I was 22 years old when my father, Richard, first invited me to join his industrial equipment manufacturing company. I had just graduated with my bachelor's degree in business management, full of ambition and eager to prove myself. The company was medium-sized back then, steady, but unremarkable. Richard sat me down in that same corner office and made me a promise that would shape the next decade of my life. "One day, son, this will all be yours," he said, his voice firm and confident. I believed him. I trusted him. And from that moment on, I gave him everything. My first position was floor supervisor. I was not sitting in some air-conditioned office pushing papers. I was on the manufacturing floor at 5 a.m. Every morning, working alongside the crew, learning every single aspect of the operation. I stayed until 9 p.m., most nights sometimes later. Weekends were not for rest. They were for catching up on paperwork, reviewing production schedules, and finding ways to improve efficiency. I immersed myself in every department: production, logistics, sales, accounting. I wanted to understand the business inside and out, because I believed that one day I would be running it. Richard was not an easy man to impress. He was stern, calculated, and sparing with his praise. A simple good work was the most I could hope for, and even that came rarely. He never told me he was proud of me. He never put his hand on my shoulder and said I was doing a great job. But I kept working, kept pushing, kept hoping that if I just proved myself a little more, he would finally see me not as his employee but as his son. 10 years passed in what felt like a blur. By the time I turned 32, I had climbed to the position of Vice President of Operations. And I had not just held the title, I had earned it. I was the one who developed the strategy to expand our market into the western states, opening up new territories that Richard had never considered. I was the one who negotiated the major contracts with corporations that transformed us from a regional player into a competitor on a national scale. Under my leadership, the company's annual revenue grew from $15 million to $60 million. I built a modern management system, hired talented people, and streamlined our production process to cut costs by 20%. The numbers spoke for themselves. I was the engine driving that company forward, but success came at a cost. I got married to Sarah when I was 26. 3 years later, we had our son, Ethan. He was the light of my life, this tiny human with his mother's eyes and a laugh that could fill a room, but I was rarely there to hear it. I missed his birthdays. I missed bedtime stories. I missed the small, precious moments that you can never get back. Sarah would call me at the office, her voice tight with frustration. "Ethan needs his father, Johnny, not just your paycheck." I would promise her I would do better, that I would find balance, but I never did. There was always another deal to close, another problem to solve, another fire to put out. I told myself I was building a future for them, that the sacrifice would be worth it. I told myself my father would eventually hand over the company, and then everything would fall into place. I thought if I worked hard enough, he would finally see me, not as his employee, but as his son. Then, one October afternoon, everything changed. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was in a meeting with potential clients discussing a contract worth millions of dollars. My phone buzzed on the table. Sarah's name lit up the screen. I glanced at it and made a split-second decision that I will regret for the rest of my life. I thought I will call her back after this meeting. 10 minutes later, my phone started buzzing again. And again. This time, it was the hospital. My heart stopped. I excused myself from the meeting and answered. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, detached. There had been an accident. Ethan had been hit by a pickup truck while crossing the street after getting off his school bus. Sarah was already at the hospital. I needed to come immediately. I do not remember the drive. I do not remember parking. I only remember running through those sterile hospital hallways, my chest tight, my mind refusing to accept what I already knew. When I got to the room, Sarah was there, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked at me and I saw everything in her eyes. Ethan was gone. My 5-year-old son, who had been laughing and playing that morning, was gone. The world collapsed. I held Sarah, and we cried together, two parents drowning in a grief so vast it felt like it would swallow us whole. The funeral was a week later. It was a gray, cold morning. The church was full of people, friends, family, co-workers, but I felt completely alone. Richard showed up. He stood in the back, stiff and formal in his dark suit. He did not come to the front. He did not hold me. When the service ended, he walked up, shook my hand like I was a business associate, and said, "I am sorry for your loss." His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was offering condolences to a stranger. Then he left. I told myself he was just uncomfortable with emotion, that he was giving me space to grieve. I did not know he was already planning my demotion. I thought he was giving me space to grieve. I didn't know he was already planning my demotion. 2 weeks after the funeral, I forced myself to go back to work. I was not ready. Every morning felt like dragging myself through quicksand. But I thought if I kept moving, if I stayed busy, maybe the pain would not consume me. Sarah was worried. "Are you sure you're ready?" she asked the night before. I nodded. "I need to keep moving. If I stop, I will fall apart." She kissed my forehead and told me to be careful. I promised I would be. That Monday morning I walked into the office like I had done 1,000 times before. People glanced at me with sympathetic eyes but said nothing. I appreciated the silence. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and tried to focus on emails. An hour later, Richard's assistant knocked on my door. "He wants to see you," she said quietly. I nodded, stood up, and walked down the hallway to his corner office. The door was open. Richard was sitting behind his walnut desk, shuffling through papers. He did not look up when I entered. "Close the door," he said. I did. I sat down in the chair across from him and waited. The silence stretched. Finally, he stopped shuffling papers and looked at me. His expression was blank, unreadable. "Johnny, I need to talk to you about your position here," he said. My stomach tightened. "My position? Is something wrong with the accounts?" I asked, confused. "No," he replied. "It's about you. Your performance has declined." I stared at him, trying to understand. "Dad, I just lost my son 2 weeks ago. I'm doing my best to—" He cut me off. "And that's exactly the problem. Your son's death is why you're getting demoted." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could not breathe. My blood ran cold. I sat there frozen, unable to believe what I had just heard. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, completely calm, completely composed. "You're distracted. The company needs focus. I'm moving you down to regional manager. Marcus will take over your position." Marcus, the man I had hired. The man I had trained for the past 3 years. The man who was 38 years old and ambitious, but nowhere near ready for the role I had built. He doesn't have personal issues affecting his work, Richard added, as if that explained everything. I felt like I was going to be sick. This was not about my performance. This was not about the company. This was about him seeing me as broken, as damaged goods, as a liability. Personal issues. I repeated, my voice shaking. "My son died." "My 5-year-old son is dead, and you're calling that a personal issue?" He did not flinch. "Business is business, Johnny. I cannot let sentiment get in the way." I stood up, my hands trembling. "Sentiment? He was your grandson." Richard finally showed a flicker of emotion. Annoyance. "And I'm sorry he's gone. But I have a company to run. Shareholders to answer to." I could not believe what I was hearing. I stared at this man, this stranger wearing my father's face, and I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. He had never seen me as his son. I was a tool. I was a resource. And now that I was grieving, now that I was human, I was expendable. "I am the reason you have shareholders," I said, my voice rising. "I built the infrastructure. I brought in the clients. I turned your $15 million operation into $60 million. I sacrificed my marriage, my time with my son." My voice cracked. "And now you're telling me his death is a liability." Richard's jaw tightened. "And I'm grateful. But right now you're a liability. Take the demotion, or I will have to let you go entirely." In that moment, I realized I had been chasing the approval of a man who saw me as nothing more than a line item on his balance sheet. I stood there for a long moment staring at him. He thought I would cave. He thought I would take the demotion, swallow my pride, and keep working like a good little soldier. But something inside me snapped. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my company ID badge, and placed it on his desk. "I quit," I said. His eyes widened. For the first time in 10 years, I saw genuine surprise on his face. "What, Johnny, do not be rash. Think about your future." I shook my head. "I am thinking about my future. And it's not here. Not with someone who sees his own son as expendable." His face hardened. "You will regret this. You're nothing without this company." I turned to leave, then stopped at the door and looked back at him one last time. "No, Dad. This company is nothing without me. You're about to find that out." I walked out of that office, cleaned out my desk, while confused coworkers watched in silence, got into my car, and drove home. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me felt terrified. I had just walked away from 10 years of my life, from a 6-figure salary, from the only career I had ever known. But another part of me felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time in a decade, I was free. For the first time in 10 years, I was free, and I had no idea what came next. The first week after I quit, I barely left the house. I spent my days sitting on the couch, staring at the walls, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Sarah was worried, but she supported me. One evening, she sat down beside me and took my hand. "I'm proud of you for standing up to him," she said softly. I looked at her, this woman who had stood by me through everything, and felt a wave of gratitude. "What do you want to do now?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. But I know I can't work for someone who doesn't value people." She smiled. "Then don't. Work for yourself." The idea started as a whisper in the back of my mind. What if I started my own company? But the fear was immediate and overwhelming. I did not have capital. I did not have a network of clients. What if I failed? What if I lost everything? But then late one night I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I thought about Ethan. I thought about the kind of man he would have wanted me to be. And I realized that staying safe, staying small, staying afraid was not honoring his memory. I needed to do something that mattered. I needed to build something I could be proud of. "I will build something better," I whispered to myself. Not for my father. For Ethan. For Sarah. For myself. The fire that grief had dimmed started to burn again. But this time it was mine. I spent the first month doing research. I analyzed the market-identified gaps that Richard's company was not filling, and developed a plan. The industrial equipment industry was saturated, but there was one area where companies consistently failed customer service and innovation. Most manufacturers, including Richard's, treated clients as transactions. They sold equipment, collected payment, and moved on. There was no relationship, no partnership, no ongoing support. I saw an opportunity. What if I built a company that did not just sell equipment but built long-term partnerships? What if we integrated modern technology, automation, Internet of Things, integration into our products? What if we actually cared about our clients' success? I named the company Apex Industrial Solutions. I had $300,000 in savings from my 10 years of work. It was not enough to launch at the scale I wanted, but it was a start. I knew I needed investors. I spent 3 weeks writing a detailed business plan, highlighting my 10-year track record, my proven ability to grow revenue, and my vision for the future. Sarah reviewed every draft, offering feedback and encouragement. Then I started pitching. I met with 5 different investment groups. 4 of them turned me down. Too risky, they said. The market is saturated. But the 5th group, a venture capital firm called Horizon Ventures, saw potential. The managing partner, a man named David Sullivan, was 45 years old and had a reputation for betting on people, not just ideas. David sat across from me in a coffee shop reading through my business plan. Finally, he looked up. "You built a $60 million operation. Why can't you do it again?" I met his eyes. "Because this time I'm not building for someone else's approval. I'm building something I believe in." He smiled. "I'm in." $1.2 million for 25% equity. We shook hands. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling like I could breathe for the first time in months. I rented a small warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was not glamorous, but it was ours. I started assembling a team. 5 people, engineers, salespeople, operations specialists who I had worked with at Richard's company reached out to me. They had heard I was starting something new and they wanted in. They believed in me. They quit their jobs and took a chance on an unproven startup because they trusted my vision. We worked around the clock. I was back to waking up at 5 a.m. and working until late at night, but this time it was different. I was not doing it to prove anything to anyone. I was doing it because I loved it. Sarah reminded me not to make the same mistakes. "Don't forget to come home this time," she said one evening. I pulled her close. "I won't. I learned my lesson, and I kept that promise." I made sure to be home for dinner, at least 5 nights a week. I made sure to spend weekends with her. We were healing together, learning how to live with the loss of Ethan, learning how to find joy again. This time I wasn't building for someone else's approval. I was building for a future I could be proud of. The first year was hard. We focused on innovation, creating smart factory equipment with Internet of Things integration. Our initial clients were small manufacturers looking to modernize their operations. By the end of year 1, we had generated $3 million in revenue. It was modest, but we were profitable. Year 2 was the breakthrough. We expanded our product line, hired more engineers and salespeople, and landed a massive contract with an automotive corporation. The deal was worth $8 million over 3 years. By the end of year 2, our revenue hit $12 million. We were on the map. Year 3 was when everything exploded. Apex had become a direct competitor to Richard's company. I focused on everything. He ignored customer relationships, after-sales service, innovation, and integrity. Our tagline became, "We don't just sell equipment, we build partnerships." Word spread quickly in the industry. Some of Richard's biggest clients started reaching out to us. They were tired of being treated like transactions. They wanted a partner who cared about their success. One by one, they left Richard's company and came to Apex. Our revenue for year 3 hit $25 million. We were approaching the number it had taken Richard 10 years to reach, and we did it in 3. My personal life was healing too. Sarah and I were stronger than ever. We learned to honor Ethan's memory while still moving forward. And then one morning, Sarah came to me with tears in her eyes and told me she was pregnant. We were going to have another child. I held her, and for the first time since Ethan's death, I felt hope again. I promised myself I would be the father I should have been. I would not miss bedtime stories. I would not miss birthdays. I would not sacrifice my family for a bottom line. I had proven that success didn't require sacrificing the people you love. It required honoring them. It was a warm afternoon in May, 4 years after I'd walked out of Richard's office. I was sitting in my new office at Apex, bright, modern, filled with natural light. My assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Johnny, there's a Richard Parker here to see you. He says he's your father." I froze. I had not spoken to Richard in almost 4 years. I had heard through industry contacts that his company was struggling. He had lost several major clients. Revenue had dropped to $35 million. Marcus, the man who had replaced me, was not capable of maintaining relationships or driving growth. Shareholders were unhappy. The company was slowly sinking. I sat there for a long moment debating whether to see him. Part of me wanted to turn him away, to let him feel what it was like to be dismissed. But another part of me was curious. "Send him in," I said. The door opened and Richard walked in. I barely recognized him. He had aged dramatically. His hair was almost completely gray. Deep lines creased his face. His shoulders were hunched. The man who had once commanded every room he entered now looked small and tired. He sat down across from me without saying a word. The silence stretched between us. Finally he spoke. "Your company is doing well," he said quietly. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I heard you took the Hartman account. That was one of my biggest clients." I nodded. "They came to us. We gave them better service." Richard looked down at his hands. "I need your help, Johnny." I did not respond. I just waited. "The company is struggling," he continued. "I made mistakes. I lost focus on what matters. I need you to come back. Help me turn it around." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Come back. You mean work for you again?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Or we could merge. Combine our resources. You would be co-owner." I felt a flash of anger. "After you told me I was a liability, after you blamed my son's death for your company's problems." His voice dropped. "I was wrong, Johnny. I see that now. I pushed away the best thing I had, my son, because I couldn't see past the bottom line. I saw through him. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about desperation. I wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to think that he had genuinely changed, that he had learned something from losing everything. But I knew better. If his company were still thriving, he never would have come. He was not here because he missed me. He was here because he needed me. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then I spoke. Dad, I spent years chasing your approval. I sacrificed my family, my happiness, thinking if I just worked hard enough, you would finally be proud of me. He started to speak, but I held up my hand. But you taught me something valuable, even if you didn't mean to. You taught me that the only approval I need is my own. So you will help me, he asked, hope flickering in his eyes. No, I said simply. His face went pale. Johnny, please. I'm your father. I shook my head. You stopped being my father the day you told me my son's death was why I was getting demoted. A father would have held me. A father would have grieved with me. You saw me as an asset, not a son. I was wrong. I admit it, he said, his voice rising. And I'm glad you realize that, I replied calmly. But it doesn't change what happened. I have built something here that I'm proud of. I have built it with people who value loyalty, compassion, and integrity, things you never taught me. His hands were shaking. So that's it, you're just going to let me fail, I stood up. No, Dad. I'm going to let you face the consequences of your choices. Just like I had to face mine. I signaled that the meeting was over. He sat there for a moment longer, staring at me like he could not believe what was happening. Then slowly he rose from his chair and walked out of my office without another word. I watched him go, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of closure. I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. He sat there for a moment longer, then slowly rose and walked out. After Richard left, I sat alone in my office, looking out the window at the city below. I did not feel victorious. I felt free. I realized I was not angry at him anymore. I just felt sad for a man who had never learned how to love, who had built his entire life around a business and lost everything that mattered in the process. A few months later, Sarah gave birth to our daughter Emma. I was there for every moment. The labor, the delivery, the first cry. I held Emma in my arms and made a promise. I would not miss her childhood. I would not let work steal the moments that mattered. Apex continued to grow. By year 5, we hit $40 million in revenue and started expanding internationally. But I never let the company consume me. I kept my promise to Sarah. I was home for dinner. I was there for bedtime stories. I coached Emma's soccer team. I found balance. As for Richard, his company eventually sold to a competitor for a fraction of what it was once worth. He retired and, from what I heard, lived alone in a house that was too big and too quiet. I did not feel satisfaction from his failure. I just felt sad that he never understood what truly mattered. I never heard from him again, and I was okay with that. Sometimes I sit in my office looking at the framed photo of Ethan on my desk. Next to it is a photo of Emma laughing and covered in paint from an art project. I think about everything I have been through. Losing my son, being betrayed by my father, building a company from nothing, finding myself in the ruins. Losing Ethan broke me. My father's betrayal shattered what was left. But in the ruins, I found something I had been searching for my entire life, my own worth. I used to think success meant making my father proud. Now I know success means making choices I am proud of. The company I built is not just about profit. It is about treating people like they matter because they do. I do not hate my father. I pity him. He had a son who would have moved mountains for him, and he threw it away for a bottom line. But his mistakes taught me the most important lesson. You cannot measure a life by dollars earned or titles held. You measure it by the people you loved and the moments you did not miss. I look at Ethan's photo and whisper, Ethan, I hope you're proud of the man I became after I lost you. I carry you with me in every decision I make. To anyone listening who has ever felt undervalued by someone they sacrificed everything for, your worth is not determined by their recognition. It is determined by how you rise after they let you fall. Sometimes the greatest success is not proving them wrong. It is realizing you never needed their approval in the first place. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever walked away from someone who did not value you? What happened when you finally chose yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about resilience, redemption, and finding your worth. Thank you for listening. And remember, your value is not determined by those who fail to see it. It is determined by how you honor yourself when they are gone. Take care, and keep building the life you deserve.